I was always impressed with that. I was old enough to remember this. What he really wants me to talk about is he invented the Dynabook. He invented Smalltalk, the first object-oriented programming language. He invented overlapping windows. I was still impressed with the quiz kids, though. I discovered when I was at Apple, I didn't actually hire Alan. Steve hired Alan. And coming from the old economy, I didn't realize that nobody hires Alan as an employee. You sponsor Alan. Yeah, so and it's in keeping with the Medici idea of sponsorship, where Alan is sponsored to think, to read, and to dream. And fortunately, he does it well enough that he actually gets paid for it. So he did that at Atari. He did it at Apple. I presume that's what you're doing at Disney, but you can tell us more about it. But he has this ability to think ahead of the rest of us. And I always thought a great definition of genius is to see the obvious about 20 years before the rest of us see it. And Alan has this ability to see things that eventually become obvious to the rest of us, but they aren't particularly obvious at the time that he observes it. And one of his most famous quotes is that point of view is worth 80 IQ points. That if you can shift your orientation and see things from a different vantage point, you can actually get a whole different context and a different frame of reference. And that's something that I think Alan has been unique at least in my experience. He is going to give us a treat tonight, and I'm not going to say anything more about it because I think he wants to do some of the other introductions that are involved with this. But let me just now introduce to you Alan Kay.
Well, it's great when your former boss still likes you. In August, when I was thinking about this evening, I was in New Hampshire leaving a wonderful concert that my friend Don Lewis had done, driving back to Boston, and really worrying about the front part of this presentation. Because in my mind, I was generating thousands and thousands of words of context about pop culture and civilization, and I hated those thousands of words because getting to what I really wanted to talk about in the middle of the talk. And while I was struggling with this, some very clear and simple musical ideas started drifting into my fevered brain in the car, and I started thinking to myself, you know, if I could just get Don Lewis to come here and start through the first part of this presentation tonight, we could actually cut through a lot of the verbiage, and in particular avoid putting categories on most words that were once wonderful words, like civilization, have been colonized, just like personal computer, object-oriented programming. These words are meaningless now. There is an object-oriented COBOL, for instance. You can. I saw a wonderful Anderson Consulting ad in one of the airports that had a spray can that had E on it. I don't know if you've seen that one, but the basic idea is, whatever it is, spray E on it. So civilization is one of those words now. It's been colonized to the point where it's useless. And I think even pop culture is. And I certainly wanted to avoid having to discuss what I thought either of those words were. But trying to think in this non-categorical way, I also started thinking about where are these ideas united, whatever they mean. And I was thinking again, well, in the world of the child, we have a huge mixture of developed and undeveloped ideas, a huge urge to be part of the culture around them, a need by most adults to develop them beyond the indigenous culture around them. And so all of those things said, I have to get Don Lewis here. So I called up Don, and we started talking about it, and he thought it was a great idea. And we went up and went to his house and spent a day thinking about this. And Don is a world-famous performing musician. He performs all over the world. In fact, playing a concert tomorrow. Plays concerts very frequently. But one of the things he does that is really neat is he puts out a lot of time going around to schools and getting kids interested in music in a very special way. And I was thinking, if we could just get this audience to pretend that they're children again, and if we could have Don come on and do the start of his concerts that he does for children, exactly the way he does them for children, dressed exactly the way he dresses for children, and talking the way he talks for the children, that would be a wonderful way to start this session. So with that, let's all be children, and let me bring on my great good friend, Don Lewis.
Good evening. Oh, you can do better than that. Good evening. All right, that sounds more like it. We're going to have a good time. You ready for a good time tonight? Yeah, I know you are. Now, some of you suspect of me right now because of these red shoes. Yeah, I like these red shoes. You could get arrested if I go out of this place with these red shoes on. But, yeah, you said probably. More than likely. But the thing that I wear these red shoes, it really is not really to match my suspenders, but it really is to pay attention to the feet. I have this weird kind of idea that everything that was created out of dance and rhythm and music. And if we start to look at the universe the way that it is, the sun comes up on time, whether we like it or not. There's a rhythm in that. And it changes depending on where the earth is positioned around the sun and the tilt of the axis. And everybody knows about all that good stuff, right? Music to me, music that I hear. But the same wave propagation that basically resides in another area above where I can hear, out to where I can see, that frequency range. So I can see the evidence of it. And then on the other end is that we've got these two senses now, the eyes and the ears, and then there's the other end on the subsonic side that basically goes down to the bottom, and then that other sense of feeling comes through. Now, you may not get as much feeling tonight as I would really like for you to have, but just think that it is there when I hit the low notes. And you don't hear them, they just sort of do this. Okay. Now, up here, I have, you can't see maybe, well, maybe later on you'll be able to see. I have 4 keyboards, 3 of which I play with my hands, and for the red shoes, they play the keyboard that resides down here on the floor, the pedal keyboard, which is normally what we call the organ kind of motif for playing. So my feet are going to be busy. Now, the reason I picked the organ to play is because the organ was, I could have played drums, probably. But I thought that the organ could make more noise than the drums. And then also, a drummer actually gets to dance a little bit with his feet, but actually his feet stay pretty much in the same place. They might pat and so forth like this. But on the board down here, I dance Most musicians can't do that unless they're playing guitar and they're dancing around on stage. But I can sit and I can dance, and that's what I like to do. Now, to test out, once in a while I get these new keyboards, and I always like to see whether the new keyboards can do the traditional sounds as well as come up with some of the other sounds. And so I always like to test the instrument out to find out whether it can do the traditional sounds, to the point, because I may have to use those sounds for, a real job. And so when doing so, I always like to test out one of my favorite composers is Beethoven. Anybody ever heard of Beethoven? Not the dog, the composer. The reason I like Beethoven is because Beethoven was a rebel. Yeah, and that's what most of these people in this room happen to be. Rebels, looking for some way to get it out. So what we're going to do, the reason he was a rebel, I think, because he changed the symphonic form. There was a form called symphonic, and it had like 4 movements and stuff, and what happened is that Beethoven, he wanted to have a chorus sing with the orchestra. And people thought he had lost it. Well, by the time he got to that part, he did lose his hearing, but that was a whole different thing. But he didn't have to hear. He really didn't have to hear, because he already understood the pulse, the time, the beat. And what I love about Beethoven is that he had heart. And no matter what he composed, he was able to take his experiences and put those experiences in a dynamic way, just like this beautiful area of Maine, where there were hills and valleys and water and leaves turning. He knew how to do that. And so I want to see what Beethoven would have done maybe 200 years ago. And we'll start out with the 5th of Beethoven. We won't do the 9th. That's the one that had the chorus in it. We didn't bring the chorus tonight, at least on that number. And then we're going to do the 5th, part of the 5th of Beethoven. So are you ready to go? Okay, let's see if this will work here. I have to pretend as though I'm the conductor, too. And I have to be also the performers. I'm going to be busy. See how Beethoven might have reacted if he had this kind of technology. Anybody know it? How about Babe? That's what the kids think, but I tell them that it really was written by a Frenchman by the name of Camille Saint-Saëns, the Third Symphony. Thank you. I guess you like Beethoven, huh? I told you he was wild. Oh man, I don't know if we could stand him if he came back. Got all this stuff. He was hurt on us. Sometimes I've been asked, how did I ever start to think about playing? Well, that wasn't the organ that time, but playing the organ, and started based on an idea that I saw somebody who played the organ that just completely blew me away. I just loved to sing. And actually in our church, in Mount Eden Missionary Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio. You've never heard of the place. got a Buckeye here from somewhere. I can tell. They always want to be identified in a strange group. Somebody told me that a Buckeye was a worthless nut, but that's okay. Somebody got it over here. Okay. But anyway, I used to hear this young man, Ulysses Rivers, play the organ at our church. We had a pipe organ. And our church, we had to do all kinds of music. We had to sing the hymns. We had to sing the anthems. We did the Mozart, we did the Beethoven, we did the Bach, we did all of that stuff. And then we had to slap you in the face with some gospel. And folks said, y'all did all of that in your church? Yeah, and we loved it. But this young man would sit there and play the organ. And Well, after church, this is when things really starts to brew around the home. And we're sitting around having dinner, and right after service, and service was ended somewhere between 1:30 and 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. It started somewhere around 10:45 that morning. And you say, how did you stay in church that long? Well, it was the music. And so they would talk about this. And somebody would say, well, child, did you see Sister Jackson and that hat she had on this morning? Yeah, honey, I was sitting right behind her. 3 pews, and I still couldn't see anything around that hat. I'm going to find out where that hat lives. And then somebody would say, oh, the choir sang so well this morning, didn't they? Oh, they were just, oh, yes, I just love it when they sing that song. And then Sister Dresden Candace, she sang that so, oh, that girl can sing for me anytime. She can sing 3 Blind Mice and make me happy. And then there was a silence, and somebody would say, but did you hear that boy play the organ this morning? And I used to sit there Sunday after Sunday. I must have been about 9 or 10 years old, and I would hear this banter going on back and forth. And I said, I don't want to wear that hat that Sister Jackson has. And the kids' choir, they could sing pretty well, but they couldn't match the adult choir or the youth choir. And I didn't want to preach like Reverend, because sometimes Reverend took too long. I said, but maybe I could learn to play that organ. I remember one night going to sleep and being awakened, well, half awakened, I guess, and a dream. And that dream was I was sitting behind that pipe organ, and I was playing. I don't know what it was I was playing, but it didn't make any difference. It just felt good to be there. Because when I saw Ulysses play, I would sit right behind the organ every Sunday and watch him. And when I saw him play, I watched everything he did. He even pulled the shoe off. Some organ players do that, you know. And he would take his shoe off. So when I started to learn to play, I took my shoe off too, until my organ teacher told me to put it back on for 2 reasons, but I won't go into those right now. How many of you have had a dream? How many of you have had dreams? Come on. You know, some of them turn out to be nightmares once in a while, but you've had dreams. Well, there was a song that came out in the 1996 for the Olympics. And that song talks about a dream. It talks about the power of a dream. And I think John was talking about Alan as being a dreamer and a doer. And many of us are in that situation of trying to make those dreams come true. And this next song that I'm about to play, it was the most difficult song I had to learn to play and sing. Not because of anything fancy, but every line of this song seemed to have been something that I had experienced in my own lifetime. And you'll see that and hear that as we start out. The power of the dream.
Within each heart there lies a magic spark that lights the fire of our imagination. And since the dawn of man, the strength of just I can man has brought together people of all nations. There is nothing ordinary in the living of each day. There's a special part that every one of us will play. Feel the flame forever burn, teaching lessons we must learn to bring us closer to the power of the dream. The world unites in joy and peace, and we pray that it'll always be. It is the power of the dream that brings us here. Your mind will take you far. The rest is just pure heart. You find your fate is all your own creation. Every boy and girl, when we come into this world, we bring the gift of hope and inspiration. Feel the flame forever burn, teaching lessons we must learn to bring us closer to the power of the dream. The world unites in joy and peace, and we pray that always be. It is the power of the dream that brings us here. There's so much strength in all of us, every woman, child, and man. It's the moment that you think you can't, you'll discover that you can. Feel the flame forever burn, teaching lessons we must learn to bring us closer to the power of the dream. World unites in joy and peace, and with a prayer there'll always be. It is the power of the dream that brings us in. Forever burn, teaching lessons we must learn to bring us closer to the power of the dream. Power of the dream. The world unites in joy and peace, and we pray that it'll always be. It is the power of the dream that brings us in. Is to realize the power of the dream. It is to realize the power of the dream. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes it is so hard to think about the simplicity of what life is talking about. Paul, thank you for bringing us back to that. Sometimes I just want to sing one note and go
But it is wonderful that we have been given this wonderful thing called music. And what is magical about it, it is not as predictable as the sun coming up. This is the time that we actually have real time control over wave propagation. Well, sort of, you know. And I think that is the power that we have in music, not just from the hearing, but the seeing and the It's kind of hard going to this next number, but it isn't. I hope that this technology thinking will be as a situation that will unite us all over the world. England, don't worry about the internet. It's going to happen. It's happening. But we had the internet way before internet. Before Benjamin Franklin put his kite up, there were cultures that were using the drum as the internet. And we could get a message across. And that's the reason when the Africans came to this country, they were banned from using two things that we look at as very vital in our world. One is to use your own language. And secondly, the other language, which could get information over long distances, the drum. There has been such a wonderful, I don't know how to say it, but it has come out of kind of strife and that type of situation for all of us. And I hope that through music that we will be able to heal ourselves as a nation and then start to realize the real fruits of our labors. But it's only going to happen when we realize what has been wronged, and don't get too upset, the Africans, with what happened over here, because remember that Egypt happened to be one of the places in Africa where the children of Israel, that is in the same place, isn't it, somewhere? Yeah, so if you know that part of the Bible, you know that story. Moses. Somebody talked about that the other day. Maybe it was John. But in the middle of this, there was the music that kept people going in the fields, that gave hope when there wasn't any hope for tomorrow. And I want you to go with me and see if we can make that kind of music. Now, there's this sound that I want to do, and I think I can do this now. Very simple words. Hold on. Just a little while longer. Now, if you forget those words, just repeat them. Hold on. Just a little while. Hold on. Just a little while longer. Why? Because everything's gonna be all right. Somebody's been at that place. Let's see what we can do with that. The tune's going to go like this, and I'm just going to ask everybody to sing it in unison. Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Watch this, 'cause everything's gonna be all right. Everything's gonna be all right. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Yeah. Now, what I want you to do right now is think about something that might have happened in your life or somebody close to you where they needed some hope. Got it. Be a glitch. But something even more fundamental than that. Let's talk about a glitch in your life. Whoa, watch it. And then think about this. And when you get to that word hold, I want you right before you say hold, I want you to take a gasp of air in. So when the hold comes out, it's going to be like this. Hold on just a little while. Let's go. Oh, hold on just long. Hold on. Let me hear that breath. Just a little while long. Hold on. Just a little while long. Everything's gonna be all right. Everything's gonna be all right. Now, when we get to that everything, I want you to like you building a mountain out of the valley, and I want you to just sort of everything. Got it? Everything. Let's try it. Everything's gonna be all right. One more time. Everything's gonna be all right. Now I just want to hear the ladies singing. Hold on. Come on, ladies, let's try it. Come on. Longer. Hold on. Just a while longer. Oh, just a little while longer. Why? Everything's gonna be all right. Everything's gonna be. Woo! Watch yourself, girls. Y'all gonna mess with us. Woo! I like that. Now let's hear the brothers here tonight. Are you ready, brothers? I want to hear that big breath now, the big breath. Just a... I said, hold on. Just a little while longer. Hold on, yeah, just a little while longer. Everything's gonna, ooh, yeah. Everything's gonna be all right. Let's try everybody now. Hold on. Just a little while longer. Hold on. Just a little while. Why? again. Yeah. Yeah. Gonna be all right. Gonna be all right. Yeah. Everything's gonna be all right. Now, I just want you to sit there and think about it. I'm going to run through some stuff because I feel like it right now. Yeah, and y'all just hold me down. No? I just want you to just hum it. Let's go. Don't pay no attention to what I'm doing up here. Here we go. Just everything. Don't bring it out. Gonna be all Thank you.
I trust that has put all of this categorical nonsense to rest. So I don't have a lot to say here, but I thought I'd throw out a few ideas for the discussion. As a musician, and we're all musicians, that's why we like it, I think everyone who's ever dabbled in music to any degree realizes that it's really not the spectrum between pop and civilization or classical and jazz or any of those things, that it's about ideas and feelings I feel that there's not a musician on earth that just wouldn't think that what they just heard is one of the greatest things they've ever heard, because it's the real deal. Talk about authentic, the real thing. And the interesting thing to me about the axis I think of is between direct ideas and developed ideas. And I think of what's sometimes called popular culture of various kinds as being an incredible reservoir, cornucopia of direct ideas. And it doesn't matter that lots of them are not very good, because that's the fate of all ideas. Most ideas are mediocre down to nothing. But to have these ideas, they have to speak directly to us first. I can say that when I'm trying to play 17th and 18th century organ music, I'm thinking of Don playing this stuff, because that's the way it's got to come out. And what we rigged a little thing on you here, because when I was thinking about this thing, I was thinking it would be really great to have Don do his Beethoven thing, where he starts off in a classical mode and then goes into what's kind of thought of as a pop mode, and then comes back out. Do some from the heart things that we all can respond to directly, and then have this interesting idea of starting with a direct idea of Hold On, one of the great songs ever, and then to develop it a little bit with you. What you were actually doing was singing something like a Bach chorale prelude, because what he did was to take these beautiful, simple melodies that everybody knew and understood, and to get people to pay attention much more strongly to them by developing these ideas. So this developed idea axis, I think, is an incredibly important one. And of course, if you develop too much, you get nothing, just sand. And if you don't develop enough, you get a lot of stuff that's of particular accord. Shakespeare was mentioned today. I recently saw a wonderful version of the play Love's Labour's Lost. And in that play, which is about a young king and his male friends who have decided to worldly things and study to obtain philosophical knowledge for 3 years, soon disturbed by the appearance of a beautiful princess and her court, all lovely young ladies, which they promptly fall in love with. And on either side of this are some of Shakespeare's low character, bumpkin type characters. And unusual for Shakespeare, he throws in a couple of academics. If you remember that play, the person cannot actually get a real sentence out of his mouth without defining every word, 15 synonyms. And to me, the striking thing about that play is not the extremes, which we would all recognize, but the fact that what Shakespeare thought was normal. This is a verse play, so what he thought was dialogue in this is some of the greatest stuff ever written. And it's really interesting to think of what Shakespeare thought of as medium discourse. So here's another idea that is in a different dimension, which is has to do with technique. So when you develop an idea, it's not quite as spontaneous in one sense. In developing it with technique, the technique has been around, the artist has learned some of the technique, knows that the technique, if you're not careful, you want it to be the servant of the art rather than the master of the art. But I think you can always judge a culture, large and small, by whether the ethical system of the culture is matched up to the technique that the culture has. And I think that's one thing about our culture and other cultures as to how are we doing on getting power through technique of various kinds, and what do we think is reasonable for that power. I I don't know whether it was McLuhan who thought of the idea, but someone of that ilk pointed out that every technique, every idea, every tool has a front end and a back end, has a handle and a blade. You can imagine some knife and having never seen one before and picking it up by the blade and cutting themselves. We're always doing that with technology we haven't seen before. The fact of the knife immediately brings up a question we never had before, which is what is okay to cut? And even more profound, one we never think about until it's too late, is have we become as cut? Because every time we come up with technique, we're also not only extending ourselves, as Brenda mentioned today, but we're also doing something to ourselves. We have to become something else in order to use that. Now, Pat Cadigan really helped me out. This is one of the wonderful things about this conference and going late. Because the drawback of it is a lot of great lines get said before you get to them. But on the other hand, think of the ideas you can steal. I had an idea for an ending for my talk, and I couldn't figure out how to get into the ending until Pat pointed out one of her great metaphors is that the web is the human brain. And she said a wonderful thing. She said, pop culture is the inventory of the cabinet in your head. I just love that image. And the thing I immediately thought of, yeah, it's a flea market. If you've ever been to one of these big flea markets like the Portobello Market in London, just acres and acres of stuff, every single artifact of which somebody cared enough about to think it up, design it, fabricate it, distribute it. And we think most of it is junk, but somebody cared. And sometimes in these big flea markets, the law of large numbers obtains, and you're able to get that very thing that you want in the midst of this incredible stuff that doesn't seem as interesting as you thought. Now, somebody once said, and I think this is less true now than it was, but when the chat room rage was happening in the internet, said the internet is an ocean 1 inch deep. So it was big, it was shallow, and it was mostly about excretia. There's an anthropologist in the 40s by the name of Gordon Child who wrote a book with the title Humans Make Themselves. I think we all have a sense that the large art form that we're involved is inventing ourselves. That's what human culture is. It's an invention of ourselves. We aren't just the genes that we're born with. We have inventions about how we should live, and we take those inventions on sometimes as though we were born with them. That brings up a really important question, I think, which is, wow, invention is hard. This kind of invention we call art, and we're really happy, I think, when an artist comes along and gives us a hint of how to be more human. I think this is the biggest difficulty with the extreme democratizing of the internet, is that it gives everybody a voice, but it might not give everybody a direction. So I think this is a very important thing. I don't mind the film, the hum. It's not you. And we could even though I hate these definitions, we could even think about civilization as kind of about how we go about our art form. Are we actually thinking of ourselves as one of our most important products, or are we just randomly tossing around as leaves on a stream? Now, my feeling is that an extreme democratization of ideas can really help if you're tough about them. So science, for example, has a very interesting first-order theory of itself. It tries not to be dogmatic. This is hard to explain to high school science teachers. The flip side of the Kansas evolution hassle that's going on now is the interesting reaction of the science teachers who are very upset that they couldn't teach evolution as fact. And teaching a theory as a fact is actually one of the worst things you can ever do to a child. Science isn't about learning a catechism. It's a very different kind of thing. And so science works by a group of people who have grudgingly and eventually accepted the following idea that, gee, we really would rather learn more about how the universe works than to find out ourselves. That is, it's worthwhile sharing our partial knowledge with others, even though they might get to some interesting thing before we do, because, God damn it, we just really want to know. And because we can't pin down this knowledge in a stronger way than a carefully made map, the most important part of science is that there are these other people out there to debug the theories. No human can be expected to be as tough on their ideas as their friends are. So you must have these colleagues, and I think this is one of the things that can bring some balance to this notion of extreme democratization and voice, which the voice and the extreme democratization is very, very important at one level, but it's actually one of the worst things that we can ever take upon ourselves unless we can find a way to criticize these voices. Now, the problem with social systems is the other reason that science seems to work a little bit is that there's a universe out there that works in particular ways and not in other ways. And so even past our friends as critics, the universe is there to say, no, it doesn't really go this way. It would be a really great story if it has a happy ending, but it doesn't go this way. It goes this other way, or maybe it goes in some way that we can't think of yet. And so one of the struggles that has been going on, and I think this is where postmodernism partly came from, is between the story, meaning to our lives, and was judged largely on how apt it was for the particular situations we found ourselves in, and the unpleasant evidence that the universe might not actually care about what we think at all. And I think that the self-consciousness that science started bringing about in the 19th century had a huge reaction. For the first time in the history that we know of, the history that's written down, the artists and the scientists parted company. This is one of the worst, and this is terrible given that science is an art. So there became a kind of a cargo cult in knowledge where the effigies were made of things that were like what science was finding out, but really had very little to do with the science. I once got asked to write a brochure for a science museum in San Jose, and they had decided to have 75 paintings about science, they said. So my essay was, it already is art. That science is already art. There's this wonderful saying that was been attributed to people, including Frank Zappa, that talking about music is like dancing about architecture. And painting about science is right in that ball game. So, good way of appreciating. Of course, science has this problem: is it doesn't actually what you put in music, technology. Science tends to be written down in books. So, last couple of ideas here is that a thing that has been noticed by anthropologists and people studying children's development, going all the way back to Maria Montessori, great genius and observer of children and thinking about how to nurture them, is that children in indigenous culture, traditional culture, don't seem to need to go to school to learn what the culture is doing. They watch the adults and they make up games spontaneously that are like the adult activities that they see, and they play at those games. That is a way of learning what they think the adults are actually doing. It works pretty darn well. Works really well until you actually start inventing things. And a lot of these inventions are hard to learn, and all of a sudden they're not actually open in the traditional marketplace of ideas. People have made the observation that if you take a child to France very early, if she was born in France, then this child will grow up to be French. And an adult moving to France and living there for some years will start becoming French. And this is because one of our genetic imperatives, and you can imagine why it's there, is to learn the environment in a fluent way that's around you. Not some other environment, but the one that is around you, because there's every reason why you should be doing that. And this says to me that when we start using technology to create things that are like environments, that are like total environments, hooking in to this skill, which I think people can't help doing, which is to start learning that environment and accommodating to that environment. So television, to me, is a particularly odious example of people without any thought of it, have created something like a total environment. Now, it's not, I don't think, a good idea to bash television unless you also look at books. Madame Bovary was about a woman who created a total environment from romance novels. This was what she learned about how her actions should come from. So when you start messing with the meta system, you have to be very, very careful. Whether it's currency transactions, messing with the symbol system there, or more importantly, when we start dealing with some deep drives that humans have that I don't think can be turned aside. So the thing that worries me about the internet is not all the good things about it, and certainly not all the crap. Same thing with television. It doesn't matter to me whether television is trying to show good stuff or bad stuff. The thing that worries me about television is as a total environment, it can't carry the full range of discourse that humans have invented. It makes a mockery of things like the political process. And that we should pay an enormous amount of attention to. And the internet, I think, is about to be overrun in a big feeding frenzy. Fortunately, it has an uncountable number of channels. So it's not going to shut out people who want to put other kinds of content on the internet. But it is very likely that one of the things that we're going to rue the day 20 years from now if we don't do something about it is to have done something about the total environmentizing of this wonderful thing that was invented 30 years ago. So, I mean, one of the ways of thinking about this is that if, for instance, suppose AOL got larger, many people don't have any sense of the internet beyond what AOL brings them. Many people don't have any sense that the internet and the web are not the same thing. The web is a really bad de facto standard, really neat. Like Windows 98 is a really bad system on top of some computer. It's really important to keep those distinctions, but I want to. As I said, it's the same thing. It doesn't quite matter whether people are trying to do good things or bad things. What's interesting is how the total environment makes it very difficult to think about things that aren't in front of us. The other analogy, which is a much more dire one, but I think it's incredibly important to take as an early warning, which is the difference between the response to AIDS in various parts of the world. So when AIDS was found to be contagious, deadly, and incurable, the scientists started beating on the government to do something about it, because no matter what the time constant is, and it's a long time constant, you always get an exponential. And the good thing about the long time constant on AIDS is it gives a chance to actually do something about it, and some things have been done. But unfortunately, this Right now, more than 30 million people are infected with AIDS just in Sub-Saharan Africa. And most of these people are going to die. So this is 3 Holocausts worth of people who are going to be used up by, if you will, common sense. Didn't look that bad, didn't look that bad, didn't look that bad, didn't look that bad. Now it's looking bad. And I believe the only way to take action on these slow changes that are inexorable and eventually exponential is that we have to muster the imagination now to understand what the benefit or the disaster is going to be of these technologies. H.G. Wells said civilization is in a race between education and catastrophe, and I'll leave it to you to discuss in the question of answers who you think is in the lead. Thank you. I believe it's not fair to end on that note, even though that's the note I wanted to end on. And so it just happens that of the there are many, many wonderful pieces of music that Don does that are of this developed kind. And I would like to bring him on one more time to do one of the most beautiful renditions of a direct idea developed so we can really grab onto it. Don? That's great.
I'd like to take this time to thank Alan for the invitation to come here. When I saw the website, camcon.org, and I examined it, I was actually in Japan. And I saw all these luminaries who were going to be a part of this conference. And to be here with people that I know have a great effect on our civilization is wonderful. But we also have a great responsibility. And along with that freedom that we have to develop and so forth, that responsibility is really in our hands of what we do with it. This next song that I'm about to do, which is very much in the genre of the music that you just sang a few minutes ago, the Negro Spiritual. And it's an old song that maybe some of you who are older than you want to have heard, and because of recording things that you wouldn't have been around to hear. But there was a lady by the name of Mahalia Jackson who sang a song that I remember as a kid. It's a song that's called A City Called Heaven. I heard of a city called Heaven. And I like to play that song for you, and I'm going to couple it with another selection, and we'll see what this ends up to be. This should be fun.
of sorrow, lost out in this wide world alone. No hope have I for tomorrow. I'm just trying to make heaven my Sometimes I'm both tossed and driven along. Sometimes I don't know which way to roll. But I heard of a city called heaven. And I started to make heaven my home. Is this our home? Is this world our home? Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. There are 3 gates in the east, and there are 3 gates in the west, 3 gates in the north, and 3 gates down there in the south, and that makes 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. I said, oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. There are 3 gates in the east. Oh yeah. And 3 gates in the west. Oh yeah. 3 gates in the north. Yeah. And 3 gates down there in the south. And that makes 12 gates to the city. There are 24 elders in the city. There are 40 angels in the city. And they are waiting for me in the city. In that big, beautiful city. Hallelujah. I said, oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. Oh, what a beautiful city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. 12 gates to the city. 12 gates to the city. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was a real treat, John. Thanks so much. This next part of the we're going to make pretty interactive, and I'm going to ask Alan a few questions, have a conversation with him, and ask you to ask questions. And let's take advantage of kind of drawing him out on a few things. So maybe we'll just start with a question from the audience. Does anyone have a question of Alan? Yes.
I have a question that relates to something that John Perry Barlow was talking about the other day. I've also found in my experience that the further you get from civilization, the more civil people get. And I was wondering, seeing technology and the computer as truly a tool made by a highly civilized society, what do you see as the possibility for people being able to use the internet to become more civil and have a civil experience? We were talking a lot about democratization and ethics, and I was curious how you felt about that.
Yeah, well, there are a number of discussions that relate to your question besides John's. I was interested in the one about whether the technology is easy or hard. I was just thinking, the question somebody probably asked 200 years ago is, why won't my violin help me keep time better? Such a hard thing. Why didn't somebody make it user-friendly? And so the nice thing about the violin is it doesn't have any gratuitous difficulties on it. So the other way I think about it also is that you can sort of tell when you're in a good place if you're having difficulty with something and they're not gratuitous, because you're on the threshold of actually changing how your mind works. This is one of this notion is this, if it's easy to learn something, then you might not be learning anything you don't already know. And so the trick on things like the violin is they have a long startup transient where you have to be in a supportive environment, as indeed children are for other kinds of things. It's rare to have a parent scold a child for falling down when they're trying to walk. And so part of the deal, I think, is to scaffold these difficult things that are really important, so that the difficulties are chosen by the learner and by the teachers in a way that helps growth. So the civility thing, one of the things I almost did for this, I'm glad I didn't now. There was a wonderful movie, which nobody's ever heard of, but maybe some people here have, which is called Walkabout. So this is one of these incredible, this is just an incredible movie. It's one of these nothing happens movies until what happens is shattering. But it's about a 14 or 15-year-old girl and her younger brother cast adrift on the Australian desert, about to perish when they cross trail with a teenage boy, an Aborigine boy, out on a walkabout. And as I say, nothing happens, but you gradually start noticing that the teenage boy is treating this desert like it's a supermarket. Need water, well, he knows where it is and can dig under the sand to get it, and needs some food, he does this. And there are all of these amazing things that happen. And the conflict in this is that in the end of the thing, he wills himself to death because of the inappropriate use of hunting animals by the white settlers that are there. It's very difficult to explain if you haven't seen it, but it's an incredibly moving thing. And it's impossible for me, anyway, to watch this movie without asking, well, who's civilized here? And that's where I came up with this balance idea, that this particular culture, the Aborigine culture, is perfectly in balance. Its ethics and its techniques were perfectly in balance. And it would be very difficult to think of anything meaning to say about them. They were just there. They had the whole thing going. They were human beings. They could, and all of these things. And it was us with our ability to shoot bullets whenever we wanted that were disturbing the fabric of this thing, because the hunters weren't hunting for food. They were hunting for fun. And that's what caused this young kid to will himself to death. So I think as I say, I think the ethical problem is really difficult because it's not like science. There isn't a place where we can go any longer, if there ever was, where we can prove what the ethics should be. It's more like math or like designing a constitution of a country, where you have to agree on some premises and try and make a system that is our creation about how to live. I don't think we do that very well right now. I think it's the most important thing that any child should learn.
Alan, you're a Disney fellow, and I've been struck by the fact that Disney, probably as much as any corporation in the world, has defined a lot of the contemporary icons of our culture and society. And yet, when you think of Disney, you think of a company that likes to be in control of everything to the finest detail. You know, how do you, as someone who comes from a different experience, how do you align yourself with that?
Well,
and is there something there that we don't see?
Well, I'm sure there is. It's a big I think the simplest way of explaining it, it's a show business company, and show business companies make deals. So before I went there, I got invited there by them, and I thought about it for more than a year, and then I negotiated for another more than a year to come up with something that would be mutually beneficial. For instance, in our work, the work of my group and other people I've been associated with in the past has generated a lot of wealth. But all the work that I've done over the last 30 years or so has been with children in mind, to try and find better, more interesting, more challenging, more constructive environments for children. The deals I've made with the companies, and John knows this because I made one with Apple when I went there, was, hey, don't ask where the golden eggs are coming from here. If the golden eggs are coming, be satisfied with that and let us do our research the way we want to. The other thing that's critical and interesting about Disney, I think, for people who have simple opinions about Disney, is that one of the points of negotiation was that we wanted, and in fact had made our software that we had started at Apple open source before going to Disney. And so Disney does not own the basic part of what we're doing. It's free to everyone, just like Linux is. And even better, most of the educational stuff, in fact, all of the educational stuff we're doing right now is being put out on the Disney free websites. Disney has a philanthropic organization called the Disney Learning Partnership. And this is a free website mostly for teachers and a bit for parents that we're putting out a bunch of stuff also for free.
So last year you were telling us about Squeak and some things that kids could do with it. Can you give us an update?
Yes. I think well, first, Squeak is open source, so for people who are of a kind of a hacker mentality, the open source site is kind of made for people who are kind of rough and ready. It's called squeak.org, and every fundamental thing that we've done is on that site. No Disney content is there. Disney owns, by the way, the license permits Disney to own the content as though they had done it in Java or in Director, but the fundamental software, the authoring tools and everything else like that, all the internet stuff is part of the open source. And so we're not too many months off from the first Disney unveiling of some of its content, and as currently planned, it will also be part of a free website. Because remember, Disney may be a large company, but they're interested in learning as well, and the open source stuff stuck in their craw until they started thinking about the advantages of open source. For instance, they do not have to pay for the 250 people around the world on the internet that are doing all of our ports for free for us and debugging our code for us and doing a million things. So this is literally millions of dollars of free work by top people that we're getting. And Disney, in a way, is allowed to take more risk with us because our budget is tiny compared to the amount of cost for this project. The other thing that they realized after a while is that any kind of authoring tool of large scope is likely to be less accepted if it's owned by a big company. Because the big company, there are big companies that own software that you would hate to put on your critical path because who knows what they might do. So the advantage of open source here is that anybody who wishes to control their own destiny can split off a pathway from ours and not even worry about what we do. Or they can follow us along in the open source thing. But in fact, they're not committing what we used to. Remember, Bob, at Park we had this thing we used to call Error 33, which is putting somebody else's work on your critical path. Very bad idea. So our motto with Squeak is we may have bugs, but there are bugs.
Well, Alan,
and that is a huge thing.
Alan, when you were at Apple, you had the Bavarian team. Maybe you could just describe for a moment what the goal of that team was.
Well, actually,
whatever happened.
this is how I first met Don. And the Vivarium was an idea about a bunch of things, but the center of it was to see whether we could get kids to learn important ideas about complex systems organization by having them create on the computer ecologies of simulated animals. And the image of this was actually of a I actually have a clip with me that people are interested I could show tomorrow that shows a thing we did on an Evans and Sutherland flight simulator 15 years ago of what this thing was going to be like. And so in the midst of this, if you're going to teach children math and science, you better restore the arts programs that the state legislatures and the school boards have taken away. So first thing we did, thanks to John, actually John bankrolled this thing really handsomely when we got started. I'm not sure he knew exactly what he was getting started with, but it was at the level where we could learn many things by making mistakes. But one of the things we found out right away is that the kids weren't nearly as curious as we were hoping they would be. They tended to be very categorical. And so the first thing we did was to, instead of even dealing with the computers, we decided, well, we better come up with a noticing curriculum for these kids. And I ran across Don when we were getting some synthesizer equipment, and Don was demoing for Yamaha in those days. And you know, to meet Don and to know Don is to become his brother. And we just became brothers, and we started doing things with the kids, to getting them to pay more attention to what's going on, to not just dismiss it by putting a name to it. And many other things happened. Too many things to talk about tonight. But these are the kinds of curriculum where to be totally goal-oriented in a curriculum is to kill the child. You must do something that's much more like gardening. Let the plant do its work and help the plants grow.
There were two things that have come back from the work that Chris Cerf and our creative team have been finding out as we've been developing Between the Lines, that Chris showed you a little bit of the other day, that were not surprising, and one thing that was a surprise to us. The two things that were not surprising was that kids love humor and kids love games, and we'd seen that with the Sesame Street success. What was surprising to us was the incredible impact that music had. And I don't know, Chris, whether you're aware of this, but he actually wrote most of the music for Between the Lions. And when we went out and did the testing...
That's why I started it.
Yeah, why we did the... When we went out and did the testing of the interstitials, we got much higher response rates in terms of understanding and engagement than we had ever expected, that our advisors like Gene Shaw and Marilyn Adams and others had anticipated. And we can trace a lot of that back to the role of music. And I was very curious, and maybe Don, you have a point of view on this as well, is to, do you think we could make some radical changes in our curriculum by introducing, you know, the concepts of music or music itself into education? Or Is that something that's...
Yes, is my simple answer.
Yes, but I look at it from a different vantage point. Last year, in my town that I live, Pleasanton, California, the school board was about to shut off the arts funding for our school district, and my kids are not in school now. They're old people now. Our youngest one is 26 years old. But they came through that system, and I knew that both benefited because of the music that was there. So I went to the school board, and maybe we have to look at this from a different perspective. I told them, I said, first, let's get our definitions about what we're teaching children about. We have an emphasis on math, science, and communications in school. Yeah, that's well-funded extracurricular activity. I said, first, let's look at what math and science are to do. Basically, they are to help us to understand, or some kind of way, in some type of language, to, in fact, examine, analyze, and so forth, our whole life in this universe, or the universe itself. I said, first, what is the universe? And the only thing that I could come up with is that it is a living, interactive art form. If anybody wants to argue with me about that, fine. But if you can find me a better definition of what this universe is, I want to know the truth. So, if we have this art form, and then we are going to tell the children, we're going to teach you how to do math and how to do science, but we're not going to teach you anything about the art form. The art form falls into these categories of what I said: music, the eyes, the art, all of this stuff. The stuff that we play with. And you're not going to teach them about the basic thing that they're really trying to examine? Because that's all we're doing, is gathering data about it, and hopefully we can come up with some ideas of how it works.
I think it's really, really critical. This is interesting conversation I've had at Disney. One of the ones I had before I decided to go there was to see if they're interested in doing some hard fun for children. Hard fun is that stuff where you have to learn how to do something and keep on learning how to do something. The more you learn, the more you get a payoff. Soft fun is where somebody makes a vehicle for you. So soft fun is watching baseball on television, and hard fun is learning to hit a hard ball. And the typical entertainment that has happened in the last 30 or 40 years has tended to be soft fun. You're in various kinds of ride vehicles, which might be theatrical of some kind, it might be musical of some kind. And to me, I think if you go into schools, it tends to be soft fun. So I think the most difficult thing now is to convince kids who are basically looking at experience, and this is actually, and Chris Cerf knows that I have some doubts about Sesame Street. Neil Postman made a good point about Sesame Street. He said, whatever Sesame Street taught kids on television, which he was perhaps somewhat dubious about, but he says whatever it did, it made it almost impossible for a kid to go to school without looking for superior production values. And so if you think about the ability to transmit evocable experiences to people, which is amazing. We just saw Don get it all out over the footlights. It's an incredible thing when you are in the presence of that. But in fact, one of the reasons he always does, and we wanted to in this thing, is to get you involved in this thing, is that isn't soft fun. So and it's extremely important for people to realize that where you get self-esteem from is by learning how to do hard fun, not by being put into situations where you're automatically successful. It's the worst thing you can ever do for a child, because at some point they realize very quickly that they're being put into a completely bogus setup, and their children are awfully good bullshit detectors.
Let's take another question from the audience. Yes. We're looking at you.
I can just yell it out.
Yeah, okay, here comes the mic.
First a comment and then a question. Just continuing on the arts theme, I've spent a lot of time photographing in Waldorf classrooms. And I can recall being in a 6th grade class on fire. And the kids listened to the Firebird Suite. They studied the Greek cosmology of earth, air, fire, and water. They looked at fire in the inner cone and the outer cone and the chemistry of oxidation. And no one told them which is the real fire, or that one is science and one is art, or one is more important or one is not. They were learning about fire, and they were learning how to experience it and understand it. And I think we put art off on the side and then debate whether it's a luxury or a necessity. It's not off on the side. I do want to ask a question. As I've reflected on this conference, we have a remarkable set of propositions that seem to be taken for granted here. And I wonder if they're really a stable set. That the internet is a bunch of plumbing that's morally neutral. That on that internet we can put all the structures of corporate power as they exist. So Microsoft has its big site, and GM has its big site, and Disney has its site. All the corporate power is there. And at the same time, it's a decentralized networking force on which we can originate content, agglutinate, come together. Groups that have been marginalized can find their identity, and these will coexist, and will feel an identity and freedom at the same time that this technology is being used to develop very sophisticated marketing profiles that, as John Scully told us, are of considerable economic value and are being sold. And I just ask all of you, is this an accurate reflection of what we've said, and is it a stable set of beliefs, or are we deluding ourselves?
I don't think we want to nail it down, or at least I wouldn't nail it down quite like that. I think that again, I wish Neil, this is a wonderful conference. It's one of the few, pretty much the only conference that I go to that I actually stay for all of the days, because and it's partly because of the speakers, but the audience is neat. And when you go to various conferences, the tendency is to judge them on how neat the audience is. This is a neat audience. I think that I don't want to say better, but I think everybody has remarked at one time or another how powerful a single person with a little machine in their closet can be on the internet. Especially since the World Wide Web is so paltry, you can hardly do anything with it anyway. And so it actually has a democratizing effect right there, that anybody can sling what HTML can do. And so I think that individuals can compete fairly well until they get popular, and then they have to have some other recourse. I wish that this conference would do one more thing when they convene next year and the succeeding years, which is to invite some critics. So one of my favorite critics is Neil Postman, who wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. The subtitle of it is Serious Discourse in the Age of Show Business. And the important thing about Neil is you don't have to agree with everything he says, because he is actually raising points that are worthwhile discussing and thinking about. And one of his notions is that along with the 3 or 4 R's should be a extensive course in crap detection. Because he says, look at it this way. Since the printing press came along, and in fact before that, with the Holy Roman Empire, every culture is competing for mind share with its ideas. And every culture has had, I think most people here realize that the great paintings of the Renaissance were funded by the church. They were advertising. That's what all of these great ceilings, they were there to enhance the feeling that you're supposed to have when you're in a church. And generally speaking, advertising is always funded by the people who have the most money, right? That's kind of the way it works. So I don't feel bad about that. What I feel bad about is the level of credulity that most people have today. Another one of Neil's great points is that he says people are now most people have to accept more on faith than they ever did in the Middle Ages. So he says they have to accept what they did in the Middle Ages, most of them, plus they have to accept all the science they don't understand, which is a whole other set of things which they haven't learned. So basically they're on the outs from most of the knowledge that's going on, and it's very difficult for them to decide whether somebody is simply telling them a good story. And here's the other thing, I'll just add one other point to it, is it would be really ridiculous if you came into this place tonight and weren't willing to become children with Don, right? Because once we give up theater, we might as well give up humanity. That's us. So we have to give over to the gig. We have to allow ourselves to be influenced, to have feelings evoked and all of these things. But you could just as easily have walked into a place with the same great music and John here is running for mayor. Political rally is just like theater. Good-looking people, well-spoken, telling stories you want to hear, great music. Should you have the same attitude in America at a political rally as you have in the theater? No way. But just think about that both in the flesh and on television, you're put into exactly the same media environment for the evocation of feelings willingly, and one in which you should be super critical of anything anybody is saying to you. And it's the ability to make those choices that is the number one thing for learning to live in the late 20th century. That's the huge thing that we have to teach.
So, Alan, many people said John F. Kennedy was the first television president. Are we going to have a first internet president at some point?
Well, I think John Perry is running.
Can we have a question from the upper deck?
Jeffersonian thing really down.
Yes. Dave? Or who's, yes. Richard?
In apropos education and learning and music and synthesis and so forth, where is Ray Kurzweil? And since he's not here to defend himself, although the evolution of some of his products have been available at the conference, do you have much to say about his view of a little tiny piece of the next 10K, 9K, sorry?
My favorite thing, I was quite surprised when I turned 50 10 years ago to discover that the fondest and sharpest memories I had were of people that I've met and worked with. And I've always considered myself a lone wolf. And in a way, the ability of people to be interestingly different from each other while still being human, I think is a really important thing. And so, if I were to be harsh about Ray, which I have no such feelings, I would call him a bit of a mystic. Mystic is a person who tends to see unity in the strongest possible way, even when it may not be a good idea. And I think that the general intellectual course his life has taken has been to alternate between trying to find unity in interesting things. And he is an interesting guy versus trying to start businesses from these various insights he's had. So he's an interesting guy. He should be invited here sometime. Oh, well, it should be.
Back in 1985, Alan, I remember you and I were walking along sidewalk in Cupertino on Apple's campus, and you turned to me and you said, "John, next time Apple doesn't have Xerox PARC." And I said, "What do you mean?" Alan? And you said, well, this time Apple's got to invent its own stuff. And he was looking at me. I certainly didn't know how to do this. So I said, well, how do we do it? And Alan said, well, actually, every idea, whether it's simple like a mouse or complex like a software programming system like Smalltalk, takes about 15 years from the time that it's conceived until it goes through gestation and comes out, if it is going to come out as a commercial product. And so I thought about it for a few minutes, and I said, well, if that's true, Alan, then that means that there are technologies that are already in incubation somewhere, and if we could go and recognize what they're going to turn into, maybe that would give us a clue what direction to go in. So this really began my education in things from a technology standpoint, not so much of how the technology works, because I don't even claim to understand that now, but really in terms of what the implications are of the technologies. And we developed something, Alan's ideas, I named it, called the Knowledge Navigator. And then I asked Alan, I said, isn't there some way that we could visualize this thing so that if people saw it, they could recognize it and see whether it was something they would like? And I remembered a few years earlier that I had the privilege to be with Steve Jobs and Dr. Land, founder of Polaroid, and we were sitting in his research laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he'd left Polaroid at that point, and he and Steve were talking, and Dr. Land said, he said, no one really invents anything. He said, things are just waiting there, and they're kind of invisible, sitting out there waiting to be discovered. And Steve said, yeah. He said, if we'd gone out and done research on the Macintosh and asked people what the perfect personal computer was, they couldn't have told us because they had no reference point for it. So we had to go and tell them. And, Steve had very strong ideas of what that should be. But with the Knowledge Navigator, we said, why can't we build a simulation of it on film with special effects long before we could actually build the product? And a simulation was, in fact, put together. And it was Alan's wife, Bonnie, and Hugh Dubberly, I think Doris Mitch. Interestingly, Michael Markman. Interestingly enough, a couple of those people, Hugh Dubberly and a few others who worked on that project, went off to a startup company a few years later called Netscape and developed something called Navigator. And
just a coincidence, I'm sure.
I thought it would be fun to show you the Knowledge Navigator that Bonnie and her team with Alan put together. This was actually done, I think, in late 87, early 88? Is that about right? Bonnie, anyone remember? It was somewhere around late 87.
Yeah,
so it isn't quite 15 years yet, Alan, but let's take a look at it, and it'd be kind of interesting to have you critique.
Should mention one thing about, one of the most amusing things about this was that there are some very funny anachronisms, and see if you can spot them, of certain things that Apple was already doing that we couldn't put in the video because of spilling the beans. So there's one that is quite glaring, and I'll leave it up to you to see if you can spot how odd it actually is.
Okay, so if we could just run that, it's about a 4-minute video, and it'd be fun to hear Alan critique it.
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father's
surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Today you have a faculty lunch at 12 o'clock. You need to take Kathy to the airport by 2. You have a lecture at 4:15 on deforestation in the Amazon rainforest.
Right. Let me see the lecture notes from last semester. No, that's not enough. I need to review more recent literature. Pull up all the new articles I haven't read yet.
Journal articles only?
Fine.
Your friend Jill Gilbert has published an article about deforestation in the Amazon and its effects on rainfall in the Sub-Sahara. It also covers drought's effect on food production in Africa and increasing imports of food.
Contact Jill.
I'm sorry, she's not available right now. I left a message that you had called.
Okay. Let's see. There's an article about 5 years ago, Dr. Flemson or something. He really disagreed with the direction of Jill's research.
John Fleming of Uppsala University. He published in the Journal of Earth Science of July 20 of 2006.
Yes, that's it. He was challenging Jill's projection of the amount of carbon dioxide being released to the atmosphere through deforestation. I'd like to recheck his figures.
Here's the rate of deforestation he predicted.
And what happened? He was really off. Give me the University Research Network. Show only universities with geography nodes. Show Brazil. Copy the last 30 years at this location at 1 month intervals.
Excuse me, Jill Gilbert is calling back.
Great. Put her through.
Hi, Mike. What's up?
Jill, thanks for getting back to me. Well, I guess that new grant of yours hasn't dampened your literary abilities. Rumor has it that you've just put out the definitive article on deforestation.
Aha. Is this one of your typical last-minute panics for lecture material?
No. That's not until,
4:15.
Well, it's about the effects that reducing the size of the Amazon rainforest can have outside of Brazil. I was wondering, it's not really necessary, but,
Yes?
It would be great if you were available to make a few comments. Nothing formal. After my talk, you would come up on the big screen, discuss your article, and then answer some questions from the class.
And bail you out again? Well, I think I could squeeze that in. You know, I have a simulation that shows the spread of the Sahara over the last 20 years. Here, let me show you.
Nice. Very nice. I've got some maps of the Amazon area during the same time. Let's put these together.
Great. I'd like to have a copy of that for myself.
What happens if we bring down the logging rate to 100,000 acres per year? Interesting. I can definitely use this. Thanks for your time, Jill. I really appreciate it.
No problem. But next time I'm in Berkeley, you're buying the dinner.
Dinner, right.
See ya. 4:15.
Bye-bye.
While you were busy, your mother called again to remind you to pick up the birthday cake.
Fine. Print this article before I go.
Now printing.
Okay, I'm going to lunch now. If Kathy calls, tell her I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Also, find out if I can set up a meeting tomorrow morning with, Tom Lee.
Enjoy your lunch. Hello, Professor Bradford is away at the moment. Would you like to leave a message?
Michael, this is your mother. I know that you're there. I'm just calling to remind you to call your sister and pick up.
So a couple of it, the actor is really a stick. That was one of the interesting problems with it. There's an interesting difference of opinion. By the way, a couple of Negroponte's ideas are in this as well. One of the one of the things I argued against was how large the Knowledge Navigator was made, because it was much more substantial. Notice he didn't take it with him when he went off to lunch. That means it's not really portable. Something you can say about laptops today. So who spotted one of the weirdest anachronisms on this? Well, definitely the icons are odd, but did you notice anything that just you couldn't imagine for a second doing this far in the future? Why would anybody stick something like a flash memory card in to record something? Who has 9 gigs on their disk right now? Right? So that was one that was out of the sequence. One of the things that we tried to do was to have the agent be an expert at extremely limited things. We were thinking that the first kinds of things that AIs can actually help for are extremely limited, narrow tasks, like being a calendar agent. We're not too far away from having a calendar agent. One of the problems in the movie was, which we showed a little bit, and then it broke down because they didn't want to force people to try and read from the screen. But did you notice that the Knowledge Navigator had a camera that was looking at the person? Okay, and the idea there is that the agent would only read when it could see that the person wasn't looking at the screen. The first software to do that, by the way, is now out on the Sony Vaio. The small Sony Vaio that has the built-in camera actually watches to see whether you're actually looking at the screen. And this answers one of Negroponte's oldest complaints that he had, which he used to say an infrared urinal knows more about what you're doing than your computer does. So there are a bunch of different things in there, but in each of the media things that Bonnie and I did with John, we always tried to have a real problem that involves some kind of simulation, because our belief was that the real computer literacy has something to do with going into a dynamic model of something you're trying to understand. And thinking up these little problems that could fit into a couple of minutes of video and be comprehensible is probably the biggest task in doing these.
I think one of the really big insights that you had was that the C is about communications, not about just computation, and that the Knowledge Navigator is much about people communicating with people.
Yeah, well, I got that from the ARPA, what I call the ARPA dream, and especially a guy by the name of Bob Barton, who was one of the world's greatest computer designers. And he was very into McLuhan. He didn't like graduate students at all. And I wanted to talk to him about computer design, and so I spent one summer laboriously reading McLuhan until I understood what McLuhan was trying to say, I thought. But I certainly did it enough to have an extended conversation with this guy, and he was right on, because his whole notion was it's a media game, understand the difference between the technology and the media, and it will tell you what to do.
At that time, there were a lot of people in Silicon Valley who just did not trust a marketing guy in charge of a computer company, and so for me to go out and start showing the Knowledge Navigator video around was evidence that this was purely, I think they used to call Apple a vertically integrated advertising agency at that point. The interesting thing was that it created a tremendous debate, and you remember Stanford University Engineering School actually held a symposium of people who came from all over the world to argue on the issue of whether the Knowledge Navigator was correct in its anthropomorphic interpretation of the agent, or whether it ought to be a prothesis as an extension of the human being. And
I certainly, in fact, the anthropomorphic agent stuff was a little bit over my dead body, but there was a really good, this is the medium is the message, because the cinematography really wanted to have an anthropomorphic agent there. But the great idea of this is one of the oldest ideas that has to do with networks, which is McCarthy's advice taker, which goes back to the late 50s. And it was in one of those early papers that McCarthy wrote that the term information utility was first used. And John was thinking, he was advocating time sharing back then, he was thinking about what it would be like to have a worldwide information utility. And he started thinking about it, and he realized, wow, we better start having programs with common sense. This is one of the terms that he used, because the idea that people would communicate with the computers algorithmically he thought was unreasonable, but he thought that you should be able to build an expert at some narrow domain like your calendar or how to get to the airport and stuff like that. And those experts, and in fact there are experts right now. How many people here use travel planning on the internet? Those are, see, AI gets a kind of a bad rap because as soon as a problem's solved, it's no longer AI. So AI is always all that stuff we don't know how to do yet. So a person some years ago said, AI is a promising technology and always will be.
But the Knowledge Navigator was actually, at least from my vantage point, extremely helpful. Because I remember, Alan, you came into my office one day and you said, Bill Atkinson is in tears. And Bill Atkinson, for those of you who don't know, was Apple's first software engineer ever. And he was also the person who created a lot of the software that went into the original Mac. And Bill was, like Alan, an Apple fellow, and he was off working on a project called Wildcard. And he had shown it to the Apple engineers, and they had totally laughed at what he was doing. And Bill, who had been working on this for some time, was in tears. And so, yeah, he was going to quit. So Alan said, you've got to get over and talk to him. So I went over and talked to Bill, and he really was in tears. Wildcard, I agreed to sponsor it out of my office. And